And now I would like to give the floor to our next speaker. Myself, as an Armenian, I think it's one of the central presentations of this symposium. I give the floor to Mr. Vahram Balayan, chairman of the Standing Committee on Foreign Relations of the National Assembly of the Republic of Artsakh, a doctor of historical sciences, professor from Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh. It's a very interesting topic, Azerbaijani policy on appropriation and destruction of the historical and cultural heritage of Artsakh. Please, Mr. Balayan, the floor is yours. Thank you so much. Allow me, first of all, to express my gratitude to all the participants of the conference. Special thanks to Ashot Grigorian for organizing this really important event. Artsakh province of the Great Armenia, since times immemorial, was creating unique cultural heritage, which is an important witness to the historical biography of this territory. Tigrana Gert Amaras, Ganzasar, Dadivank, Yagishe Arakel Monastery, Titernavank. This list is endless. Thousands of churches, monasteries, khachkars.
В общей сложности до полного изгнания армян из Artsakha было зарегистрировано.
Until Armenians were deported from Artsakh, we had over 5,000 historical and cultural monuments. Unfortunately, we have to highlight today that the further existence of these undoubtful evidences of Armenians existing in Artsakh are in the hands of the so-called civilized 21st century. Based on the multiple various facts, the evidence of the ethno-cultural genocidal policy of Turkey and Azerbaijan that they traditionally conduct towards Armenians and Armenia were multiple times mentioned in scientific articles, videos, films, political conferences, and discussions on the highest international level. However, the problem is not only persistent and alarming, but it also takes an illogical, anti-humanitarian nature after the period of 2020-2023. The military aggression unleashed against the people of Artsakh on the 19th of September in 2023 and the complete deportation of the indigenous Armenian people from their historical land until now, unfortunately, didn't get any proper condemnation by the international institutions. In the concept of this indifference, we can see the growing scale of Azerbaijani policy in deporting Artsakh population and also the oppression of Armenian historical and cultural heritage. On the other hand, we see cases of destruction of Armenian heritage and cases of vandalism. The joint Turkish-Azerbaijani aggression that was unleashed in September 2020 with the purpose of occupying the entire territory of Artsakh was already accompanied with the destruction of historical and cultural heritage. This time it was done openly, and the cassette bombs were deployed there. The facts are multiple and convincing. In this way, on the 8th of October 2020, the Church of Christ All the Savior, Saint Kazan Chechot, was shelled with artillery. But in response to the international mass media questions, President of Azerbaijan just presented it as something casual, whereas This kind of representation of the fact shows that the head of Azerbaijani state is simply ignoring international norms. Several days after the conquest of Shushi, the trilateral agreement was signed on the 9th of November, and by pure chance, in inverted commas, the Karabakh church was exploded, and in internet we saw the photograph of the bell tower fully demolished, and probably the church is now used for different purposes. In 2020, there was a full destruction of Zoravor Church in Mekhakavan. Multiple khachkars and gravestones were destroyed. There are documentary videos published in internet by the authors of this vandalism. Multiple facts of vandalizing and destroying the cultural heritage in the occupied Artsakh land caused anxiety in the international platforms. In 2021, the UN International Court made the relevant decision in December and demanded that Azerbaijan prevents and stops the acts of vandalism and destruction of Armenian cultural heritage. But this was not the depletive list. It also contained churches, cultural monuments, artifacts, gravestones, etc. This decision was followed by another decision dated to the 11th of December 2021 to send an independent UNESCO mission to Nagorno-Karabakh for the evaluation of condition of the most relevant cultural monuments of Artsakh for their further prevention and distortion. However, the arrival of this fact-finding mission in Nagorno-Karabakh was cancelled because of the artificial obstacles that Azerbaijan created. Moreover, President of Azerbaijan, who visited Hadrut, he, in the yard of Tsakuri monastery, ordered to erase all Armenian scripts from Armenian monuments. Let me tell you that all attacks on the cultural monuments for the purposes of the distortion or erasing of their identity must be subject to the protection by UNESCO. And this is a binding responsibility of UNESCO member states. However, in this case, not only the condemnation was not provided by UNESCO, but also UNESCO had severe problems with its reputation after that. In March 2021, Azerbaijani militants were cynically vandalizing Saint Yagisha Church in Mataris region to appropriate the monuments of Hellenistic period in Tigranakert and to attribute them to the nomadic Turkish element. The so-called Azerbaijani cultural scientists are trying to represent the foundation of a building on the territory of the monastery. They try to attribute it to a 5th century Muslim bath. But in fact, it's a monument dated to Hellenistic period. And it's a fact which is being falsified, and also it's a fact of appropriation of Armenian spiritual and cultural heritage, as well as a manifestation of ignorance. The policy maintained by the president of Azerbaijan today shows that this country remains an enemy of human civilization. whereas the park dedicated to the Artsakh War in Baku was not only the culmination of the state propaganda, Armenophobia, and hostility. It was one of the most terrible and horrific museum in the history of mankind, if you can call it a museum. It is not by chance that it was sharply criticized by many international media and reputational politicians. The actions that were committed with the purpose of destroying the culture of any nation or ethnical group is called the national cultural genocide. According to Raphael Lemkin, genocide is not just the physical destruction of a national or religious group, but also the destruction of its national and spiritual culture. Today, on all territories occupied by Azerbaijan, on the state level, they destroy historical monuments and legally they document it's labeled as cultural genocide. Azerbaijan is doing this by ignoring all international organizations and norms. After the recent political events, Azerbaijan started appropriating Armenian Christian values, and this phenomenon reached unprecedented scale. They announced the Armenian churches, Albanian churches, and sometimes they were intentionally destroying the cultural monuments, and this was the implementation of anti-Armenian political agenda in Azerbaijan. In 2024, the state budget of Azerbaijan provides an investment in Karabakh in the amount of $6 billion. Within this context, it is announced that Gandzasar Monastery complex must be restored in its initial Albanian appearance. They published a project of transformation of Berzor church into a mosque. In other words, the above-mentioned budget will be directed at the destruction of Artsakh historical and cultural monuments, and instead of them, other buildings will be built, or the works will be conducted to distort the appearance and nature of Armenian monuments. The recent political events are once again witnessing to the fact that Azerbaijan, created on the basis of Great Turan ideology in the 20s of the 21st century, became the executor of these programs. This is another reality that requires urgent and sufficient measures and subsequent steps to withstand the old tricks and old but yet new dangers, because they are aiming at not only Armenian people but the entire civilized world. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Mr. Balayan. Whatever you said are well-known facts in the Armenian community. Moreover, in 2005 and 6 in Nakhichevan, Azerbaijan destroyed around 10,000 Armenian khachkars. Khachkar is an ancient Christian tradition of carving crosses, embroidered crosses in the stones. One of the incredibly beautiful khachkars was erected in the center of Bratislava by your humble servant. Every year we convene there on the 24th of April, on the day of Armenian genocide. As for the term cultural genocide, my daughter, Datevi Grigoryan, she is in London, in the University College London, and 10 years ago she wrote a thesis there, which then we published in the form of a book. And she wrote a book about what is cultural genocide. This book was translated into several languages, and the book gives a clear legal definition to the cultural genocide. A cultural genocide is always accompanied with pre-genocidal, during genocidal, and post-genocidal events. Myself, as president of the Armenian Forum in Europe, I directed to the Secretary General of UNESCO, to Irina Bokova, a complaint urging to immediately send an expert group in Nakhichevan and to record that instead of a huge gravestone of Khachkars, we now see the shooting range. Mr. Aliyev immediately allocated $1 or $2 million to UNESCO. But this is not all. Miss Mehriban Aliyeva, back then, she was the goodwill ambassador of UNESCO. And at the same time, the husband of Irina Bokova suddenly got $1.5 million on his bank account. And we were shouting out to the world that this is corruption. Even Pan Ki-moon responded to me. Irina Bokova wrote lots of silly things, but we achieved Reuters agency, and then it was also reiterated too by the British Guardian. They published articles, and they wrote that when the the Forum of Armenian Unions in Europe is talking about corruption, at the same time, the Bokov family bought 2 apartments in Manhattan. After that, Bokova was dismissed from UNESCO, but unfortunately, until now, no expert group
of Azerbaijan
visited Azerbaijan, and nobody wants to see that it's a cultural genocide. Of course, a cultural genocide is less of a crime than a human genocide, but it's a terrible crime indeed, international crime. And in this sense, I appreciate a lot your work. And in the future, we must present to the world the Christian monuments in the region being destroyed. Please, Ms. Gevorkian, I want to say that cultural genocide is always accompanied and followed by physical genocide or preceded by physical genocide. Yes, indeed. We will have a few other interesting presentations today regarding the Armenian topic. But before that, I would like to ask Mr. Prime Minister Jan Charnagursky, the co-chair of Pan-Up Vienna Club, the chairman of the Coordination Council of the International Association Friends of Crimea, Mr. Jan Charnagursky, to take the floor, please. Thank you so much. Thank you for giving me the floor. I prepared a presentation entitled as I am looking for a title for global changes in our times. But I think that after the presentations that I heard here, I'd better speak more clearly about what I heard, and I'd rather reiterate to your speeches as well, other than only reading my presentation. I see that at this conference, and this maybe is the advantage of this conference, we see 2 different approaches manifested towards the concept of global world order. And first of all, of the power states. The Western approach, and it was reiterated in Ms. Guerrero's presentation. It was typical in the meaning that it strongly witnesses to the formal conditions for everything and everyone. In the Eastern concept, we can see a less focus on the formal conditions and a bigger focus on the material prerequisites. These formal conditions are the European Union seems to be built on clear formal conditions and the constitution and so on. But when Hungary this year or last year, I think in the beginning of this year, when Hungary said it's not going to vote for, and it practically stopped the European funding for Ukraine, we saw that there were threats immediately for Hungary, and there were warnings that this and that will happen if Hungary does so, and Hungary's economy would be practically destroyed. And thus, Hungary decided that it's better to step back and vote for this funding. It was not the first case. Some 5 years ago or so, the EU Charter was drafted, and in Ireland they voted against it. Okay, then the Charter was slightly changed formally, and in Ireland they voted, and again there was such a big pressure on Ireland that after that Ireland voted for the bylaws. Those who know these conditions of the EU may know it better, and they may know more similar cases. In the eastern part, as I said, there are more material conditions or simply more power. And there, in Russia, first of all, the arguments given sound as follows. 3/4 of the global population are not on the Western side, softly speaking. And this is every now and then shown. We can see this every now and then during the voting in the United Nations organization. We can see this in the support to Russia and also the countries not joining sanctions against Russia. I traveled to Russia for 2-3 days recently, and although sanctions against Russia are also affecting the airlines, I took my planes to Russia, not directly as previously. I had to fly indirectly via Belgrade or Vienna, but these are small, unpleasant difficulties that sanctions brought. And the question now is, which principle will prevail? Now that we heard colleagues from Armenia about what is happening in Artsakh, no arguments, no explanations with international laws is going to help Artsakh, and the cultural genocide of Artsakh will go even further. They will go further. They will destroy everything unless they are stopped by a greater power. And this power is not just a theoretical power. And this was illustrated very clearly last year in Niger. In Africa, there was a coup. The army removed the old president and the new president came to power. You may say that this is just an African method of changing the government, but later it was printed in mass media and then it was lost somewhere. Niger is very rich in uranium, and since uranium mines used to belong to Francophone Africa, this uranium was simply extracted by the French companies, and they were selling it in Europe at the price of around $200 per ton. Niger was getting 5% of that. After this coup, for the sake of human and, first of all, constitutional fundamentals of this coup, it is possible to hear many people opposing. But then, firstly, these Francophone countries in Central Africa set an ultimatum to Niger to bring the old president back.
In Niger, in Niger, they had a French military base, and when if nothing else would happen, then your regime in Niger will fall. But then private Russian military organization arrived to Niger, maybe Prigozhin or someone else, but any intervention of the Francophone countries into Niger will have no chances to happen. The French military base disappeared from Niger, and I have read in a newspaper that the Russian company is now mining this uranium. And Niger is getting on percentages.
W dziękach prosta elektrona energia we Francji będzie drożej.
France will lose because the electricity in France will go up. They won't be able to actually buy cheap. Uranium from Niger, and they have to increase the prices for electricity generated. The Russian now at some time under the name of Russia, at some time under the name of the Soviet Union has helped these African countries to
И это будет продолжаться, когда
decolonize. So this will continue. And if Russia is not defeated, this process will continue. The process of decolonization. And
и война на Украине теперь
the war in Ukraine,
только о Украину пишется в западной прессе. О, свобода, идет о свободу Украины. Вообще не
they're writing freedom to Ukraine. But the issue is not the freedom of Ukraine.
Зеленский давали в тюрьму оппозиционеров, закрывали телевизионные
Poroshenko and others were jailing individual journalists. They were shutting down TV stations and media outlets. And Bismarck said in 19th century that those who want to defeat Russia should start with Ukraine.
Этот, ну, что сказал Бисмарк, пойдет в архив. Пойдет в архив.
So if Russia will defeat Ukraine, then whatever Bismarck has said will go to archives. Russia has started military attack on Ukraine in 22. In February of 2021, that the US started to build their military base near Odessa in Ochakov in 2019. So who started the war in Ukraine? The US or Russia? So the struggle in the future, according to my prognosis, will go exactly in this direction. So if Russia, Ukraine, India, and many other countries or in other words, 3/4 of the population of the world will win, or a formal system of the former Western world will win over. Until now, the Western world is not able to achieve victory. And I would like to say one more thing. Macron wants to mobilize Europeans to fight Russia. Okay. Be my guest. If Macron wants to do that, let French soldiers to fight in Ukraine. But in Slovakia, Russia is not considered to be a threat for Slovakia. The majority of people in Slovakia do not think that Russians are the enemies. In Hungary, the picture is more or less the same. In Greece, probably the same. So when the European Union wanted to act as one European Union against Russia, it would destroy the European Union, because in Slovakia we will have demonstrations, people will go against us, and they will use all the possible means to oppose this idea. In Russian publications, about 10 years we're having this idea that unipolar world that existed until now is disappearing, and instead we will have multipolar world. So now the US, China, Russia, probably also India very soon will be those poles, and then it may change. We will have more poles or we may not have more poles, but this is a completely other issue. But
Один полюс США
one
или
pole, the US or the Anglo-Saxon world,
исчезает,
is
пока
disappearing
не сможет решить проблемы
because unipolar
и
world cannot solve the problems of the world. Those problems could be addressed
этих полюсов
by multipolar world. I have named at least three of them.
Вопрос о том, как изменится этот мир,
The issue is how the world will change and make a transition from unipolar to tripolar. It would be done through the war or through a
когда это случится,
treaty.
это будет название
We don't know.
эпохи, ну, современной эпохи, в которой
But when it
будут
happens,
такие
it will be
изменения. Спасибо.
the new epoch in which those changes will take place. Thank you very much.
Спасибо вам, господин премьер.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. You have said many important
Можно
things,
сказать,
and
это
I
резюме
may say that you have summarized whatever we have said yesterday and today, despite the fact that you were not with us.
резюме.
It was very similar to a concluding
Я не
remark.
на мониторе, так что, наверное, снимаем.
I don't see Abbas Juma on the monitor, so we're left with
После чего
one important intervention. Then I would
начинать
ask
дискуссии по этой
you to start the discussions of the last topic.
пропустить выступление господина Тиграна Урыханяна,
We will hear from Tigran Rikhanyan,
трех созывов
former
Общественного собрания
member of
России.
the parliament of the
Тема
three
выступления господина Урыханяна следующая.
different convocations. The topic of his presentation is the
Преткновения. Россия меняет мир.
South Caucasus is a stumbling block. Russia is changing the world and Transcaucasia in the prospect of change. Please start his presentation. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I would like to greet the participants of this forum. I would like to thank Mr. Ashot Grigoryan for invitation to take part in this event. My short intervention, which is about 10 minutes, will touch the topic of related to the region where the Republic of Armenia, my country, is located, and I have an honor of presenting my country at this symposium. So I decided to choose this format, which is somewhat different from formal intervention. During the speech, I will go back into the history and return to the current realities, of course, in the format of the topic of my presentation, which is South Caucasus, Russia changing the world, Armenia, the prospects, and also what is developing around the overall situation in the South Caucasus and countries in the region, including the Republic of Armenia, in the context of the global changes that we see in the world. So my look back will go 20 or 10 years back, because whatever is happening now is actually fitting in this 20-year development period and the events that have unfolded and reached their culmination now. Probably it is the decisive period for Republic of Armenia. Russia has started to change the world, and it happened openly with the start of the special military operation in Ukraine, or maybe starting from the moment when the Russia Federation was stating that it is unacceptable that NATO is getting closer to Russia's border, and threats caused by this. And there were some statements made from Kiev, and then further actions which have been taken as a result. So going back in the history, at the beginning of the new millennium, when there was multidimensional cooperation between Russia and the collective West or European Union and the US, it was creating a new architecture in the South Caucasus, and the Republic of Armenia had to have a specific foreign policy. It was 10 years of the second president of Armenia in power, and then starting from the late 2000s, it was the third president of Armenia, and of course the political forces which were supporting them and having the majority in the parliament. So they were conducting complementary policy at some period, as they called it. So they were combining or sometimes contrasting the interests of Russia, which always played key role in the region, and the West. The West was trying to expand and strengthen its presence in the region. Armenia was trying to win some time, agreeing with the Russian Federation, at the same time trying to deepen relations in many areas with the US and the collective West, also expanding the military cooperation with the West. I'm not going to talk about the foreign policy which was implemented in any specific period. I don't want to discuss this in the format what it may have brought, what we have actually received, what is the situation in the region around our country. What we have, it's obvious. But at the beginning of the 2000s, in one of the countries neighboring with Iran, in Armenia,
численности персонала, в том числе и, скажем так, неоднозначной направленности по своим поставленным задачам перед ними, по своей деятельности. Посольство Соединенных Штатов Америки.
The embassy of the United States was built in the capital of Armenia in Yerevan. It was commissioned in 2004, and it was absolutely disproportional to the size of Armenia because it was a very big embassy with redundant functionality, with large number of personnel involved and with large staff, etc., etc. Not in Georgia, not in Iraq, but in Armenia, because I was dealing with this topic for 11 years, and then for 10 years I was also dealing with this issue at the level of parliamentary cooperation and platforms. I believe that our interests are the interests of the collective West and the interests which are on our territory or being projected to the territory of Armenia from the other side of the Atlantic have two main concepts. So they have two pillars on which they rest, or the activities that I was tracing for more than 2 decades were resting, and in the future it will again be based on this two main components, and this the Iranian dossier first, and
с Российской Федерацией. В середине 2000-х, хочу напомнить,
the comparison and contrast with Russian interests. So on the table
соответствующие действия со стороны Запада, в частности,
We
Соединенных
had
Штатов Америки.
a quite restrictive dossier of Iran, and we were expecting that the US may take quite strict measures, including the military intervention. They were discussing even the dates of the airstrikes, and we all probably remember the rhetorics and the threats.
Ну и так далее и тому подобное. Я сейчас не буду в силу формата мероприятия, темы и
So, because of the format of this event and limitations in time, I won't go into the details why
не ушел из повестки, но временно
this issue is still on the agenda, but it is frozen. Why
действий, ну, кроме
no actions were taken against Iran except
что вопрос никуда не уходил.
the permanent sanctions? I would like to say the issue is not withdrawn yet. Sooner or later, they will return to this problem
Потому что там
because there are resources, there is oil there, so there is a possibility of
с обеспечением
igniting a new conflict based on the
ресурсов,
national interest to take over the resources, to strengthen their own currency, etc., etc.
направленное
And
внедрение
I think that
Республики Армения
building
одну из
such a big embassy in the Republic of Armenia and targeted intervention into Armenia has a goal to deploy this platform at some point against Iran, because the Iranian dossier has not withdrawn. And if there would be negative developments, it will play some role. If we will have in Armenia the same power or the same authorities which are complementing this policy, which will basically lay down under the US interest, will actually sacrifice the national interests to the US interest. And the second pillar is the opposition to Russia. So we have to look at the realities that we have in place
нового, что ли,
as a result of a new format
своих национальных государственных
of defending on national strategic
федераций. И,
and
конечно, я имею в виду
state interest by Russian Federation. I would refer here to the beginning of the Ukrainian operation and the policy that the leadership of Russian Federation is implementing in terms of defending on national and in particular the regional interests in South Caucasus, where Armenia is located. So if in the past Armenia was able to actually navigate in the sea of interest and from time to time sacrifice the relations with one side to deepen the relations with the other side. So they were able to combine the interests of the two sides because there was some kind of cooperation between Russia and the West. We no longer have this opportunity. It is the time when you have to actually choose your side, and you cannot procrastinate this decision. And so-called leadership of Armenia is going in one direction, trying to lead the Armenian nation in that direction. If that happens, it would be tragic for Armenia. And then we may pass the point of no return. And it would bring some additional losses, including territorial losses. We will also have losses of lives, which we have seen recently, and we will face national tragedy, which we have seen also not long time ago. It may also lead to the loss of sovereignty and statehood. It's painful for me to talk about this, but the solutions require a pragmatic approach, and to this end, I don't think that Russia will be
будет терять свое
conceding on positions,
влияние,
will lose
происходило в
its
мире вообще,
influence in the world in general and specifically in such an important
интересов России регионе, в таком регионе, как Южный Кавказ,
region, South Caucasus, which is
страной
very important for the Russia's national interests.
являются одним из важнейших
And
российского присутствия в регионе вообще.
Armenia is an important factor in terms of the Russians' influence in the region and presence in the region. So as a result, there would be
Очень вероятным. Я думаю,
specific response to the threats
представляют себе
that may
в плоскости
materialize in the region. And I believe the decision makers,
в России
those who make strategic and important decisions in Russia, understand those threats. And if
сданы с легкостью.
someone
Эти позиции будут сданы
thinks that those positions will be given away easily
руководству
because of the decisions of the current Armenian government
влиянием
or under the influence of the regional
влиятельных в регионе,
countries which have influence in the region or
представляющих Запад отдельных стран, которые сейчас более чем активно
those
присутствуют
who represent the interests of the
в процессах.
Western states
Назвать вещи своими именами,
who
подталкивают
actually push Armenian leadership to
которая будет, я считаю,
make a critical mistake, which in my view will be the point of return. I would like to reiterate this. This will never happen, I believe. More probably,
обладает
the
мощью, чтобы не допустить
Russian Federation has sufficient potential for not letting that happen. I don't know how it will be done, whether with force or
это будет встречено
smoothly and softly. I don't know. It may be an open opposition with all the consequences and losses as a result.
я сейчас предположить не могу.
I cannot make any guesses about this, but
На десяток лет примерно, может 12-13 лет,
if we go back 10,
в Армении
12,
должны
13
произойти
years, when
которые рано или
some
поздно
processes started, I mean that sooner or later it would lead
определятся,
to the point where you have to actually make up your mind. This was a fact. It
это не могло быть упущено.
it should have been noticed. It was not possible to miss that, and it should have been taken into account
Событий.
in the context of the current developments. Therefore,
Меняющая мир, меняющая конфигурацию в мире Россия,
Russia that is changing the architecture of the world, and I mean here the formation of
из этого
bipolar, if not multipolar world,
балансом
this will lead
решал
to
океана, которые могут допустить
a more balanced situation when
на протяжении короткого времени в процессе эскалации, очередной эскалации конфликта в секторе Газа могут допустить смерти
the US
в количестве
is allowing, I mean,
6 тысяч
casualties that go over 6,000 people
могут допустить
in Gaza sector, including children and
существовавшее на последнем этапе
women.
историческом существовавшее как минимум 3 десятилетия, я имею в виду, конечно же, Нагорный Карабах, решалом, которые
For these people, Nagorno-Karabakh, which is a country that existed independent only for 30 years, could not be important. They are simply
политическим влиянием
trying to expand their military and political influence. They want to get hold of resources. This is the most important thing. They're also guided by the global financial interests, but they lead the world to tragedy.
Так вот, меняя ситуацию,
So changing the situation
скажем так, не совсем естественное развитие событий в нашем мире,
and by balancing unnatural
то же самое
developments
наш
of
регион. И если не произойдет
developments in the world, Russia is trying
в плане
to change the situation, and
событий, то это не значит, что если этого не видно, то это не значит, что
If it is not visible, it doesn't mean that it won't happen, and it is not leading
Это не значит, что этого не будет.
to such an end. It will happen, and Armenia should make up its mind.
В плане новых взаимоотношений, вернее, отсутствия взаимоотношений.
In terms of new relations or lack of relations,
Запада и России,
when you
висящие в воздухе
see the clash of interest between the collective West and Russia, when you have also Iran on the agenda and
на территории нашего региона
in the verge of the new developments in our region or around our region, our country right now,
в самом обозримом будущем
in the very visible future, should actually
свою осознанную
decide where to go, because as a politician who
в рамках взаимоучета интересов, сопоставления интересов,
was trying to
стратегического партнерства и союзничества,
compare and combine interests, also to have
полагаю, что выбор у нас очевиден.
strategic relations or ally relations between
Для нашей страны
Armenia and Russia. For me, the decision is obvious, but Armenia should draw the line right now,
не когда-то, а вот
not
сейчас.
sometime, but right now.
Я хотел бы обратить ваше внимание на то, что господин Улиханян сказал, на то, что господин Лео Хензел, наш немецкий эксперт, днем сказал. Между прочим, глубоко об этом знает тоже Фадер Патрик, глубоко знает.
Can you ask Mr. Grigorian to pick up the microphone, because I cannot provide interpretation without input. I'm sorry, but I cannot hear him.
Где так званый премьер-министр заранее уже получил свои деньги и продает до конца. Я забуду уже то треба.
I forgot to actually pick up the microphone, sorry. Briefly.
Армения достал правительство предателей и премьера.
Armenia has the government of traitors led by the prime minister, who, as Mr. Zatvorin said, already has taken on money beforehand, before the war, probably. He probably started his time in office. So he has not sold Armenia fully, but he sold Artsakh, and he cannot go away until he sells Armenia in its entirety. So now we're working on a program to save Armenia, and he is working on a program how to expel Russia from South Caucasus, because that's his assignment. Because his task is not to destroy Armenia, but also to bring in the NATO armed forces and also to cut the connection between Iran and Russia, and to finish the old agenda. We're also working on our projects, and this symposium, which is also followed on the Zoom by many of our compatriots. I'm happy that this conference
I'm happy to say that we're going to broadcast this conference in 2 languages, in English and in Russian, to all possible social platforms, social media and channels, and hopefully millions will listen to us, and this will enable us to speed up the processes. If we don't speed them up, then they will not yield a positive result. I have prepared the resolution on behalf of our symposium. We have disseminated it to everybody today. We got some amendments from the speakers. Lubitsa, please give one copy to the Prime Minister, a copy of the resolution. So, item 1, address to the international organizations and politicians. Item 1, find ways for the dialogue to stop the development of World War III. Item 2, address to the conflict sides. Stop the war in Ukraine. NATO and Western countries should stop equipping Ukraine with arms and urge it to sign a peace treaty with Russia. Item 3, address to the Israeli authorities on urging them to stop the genocide in Gaza Strip, where more than 10,000 children have already been killed. Number 4, urge the international organizations to help Armenians to return to their historical land of Artsakh and restore the sovereign power of Artsakh Republic. Number 5, demand from Azerbaijani authorities to immediately release the imprisoned presidents of Artsakh, Bako Saakyan, Arkady Ghukasyan, Araik Harutyunyan, and other 5 representatives of Armenia. I'm talking about an episode when, on the 19th of September, when this fast attack on Artsakh was unleashed, there was a demand that all the Armenians must be immediately deported from Artsakh. And during that time, 8 state officials from Artsakh were arrested. Out of them, 3 are the presidents of Artsakh. Bako Saakyan is the pre-last president. Arkady Ghukasyan was before him, and Araik Harutyunyan, the very last president, the most recent president of Artsakh. At the moment, they are in prison in Baku. We don't know what kind of disasters are happening to them. If we know the entire hostility of Azerbaijan in destroying Christian monuments, we may only assume that our national heroes of Artsakh will not be treated kindly. Item 6, address to Azerbaijan with a demand to stop the destruction of Christian cultural monuments of Armenia and Artsakh. This is something raised in the last part of our symposium. Item 7, Ms. Gevorkyan, this is item 7, requirement to the authorities of Armenia to clearly specify the current state of affairs between Armenia and Russia. Armenian people do not imagine their future without Russia. Frankly speaking, I got some observations from our colleagues. So far, we were not envisaging them, but your opinion really matters to me. Are you against? You didn't have time to prepare? Okay, then please take this and read this, and we will talk about this later. If somebody wants to, let's say, submit his opinion today or tomorrow, we're ready for that. We can work on these addresses, but on the other hand, please keep in mind that the symposium always has a big impact on the future processes. If it clearly formulates the addresses, and these addresses are directed respectively. Are there any objections?
Yes, please. Microphone.
One of the elements which has emerged in our discussions has been the almost total breakdown of relationships with Russia. There is no discussion, no dialogue, no speaking at every level, and particularly in the academic realm where I function, speaking here with Jan, that is the case. In the religious context, again, where I function, that does not exist. So is it possible either on one or perhaps as a new item, which could address the need to restart a discussion, a dialogue with Russia in a multifaceted way, incorporating institutions and others? For if we do not start to speak, then we continue in this downward spiral. So we have to find a way in which we can now engage with Russia.
Thank you very much, Father. Really, I am very surprised. You know everybody what about Armenia, and it's very, very interesting that your opinion about connection Russia and Armenia, I think it's absolutely right position, and every Armenian must absolutely have this point. Believe me, what you now want that we must add in our resolution, I make immediately, and I think everybody have understood which important with high important for your opinion. I am very sorry where I speak Russian and another language. English for me is a little bit difficult, but we have understood, I think, and I add this point. Я думаю, что вы все поняли, что
I think we all understood the proposal of Father Patrick, and you know, it's a sheer pleasure for me to hear this from a great friend of ours from the United Kingdom, where there are few great minds like Father Patrick Sugdeo. And we should be grateful to Lord that we have these possibilities now. Does anybody want to add anything? Please take the microphone. I would like to add the words of gratitude to you, and unfortunately, I think we discussed very briefly the challenges the UK is facing in this global context. We're sharing your concerns. We as experts do not have any predisposition to anti-British views, and we are not xenophobic at all. We understand what the risks are in the external contour of the United Kingdom and what are the risks that the British authorities can now subject its population. In this sense, we are very compassionate to the British nation. Thank you so much for your brave and not propagandistic and brave position. It's a very daring action, and maybe your service to Lord gives you this power. I want to wish you every confidence, good health, and not only confidence and health, but also health and strong belief. Thank you very much, Ms. Gevorkyan, for your positive feedback. I absolutely agree with you because I was talking slightly longer and I know Father Patrick slightly more, and I know Karine, the amounts of financial aid he's sending to Armenia and how he wants to work with Russia. If I give you the figures, you would be really surprised, but I have no right to do that. On the other hand, I know the deep gratitude of the Armenian Church and the Catholicos. Personally, the name of Father Patrick in Armenian Church and in Armenia is deeply respected. So deeply respected that when yesterday Father Patrick showed me his order of Gregory the Illuminator, I know what a precious gift it is. And also he has an award from Artsakh. My friend also has an order, a medal of Mkhitar Ghosh. It is normally awarded to significant lawyers. So Jan Chernobyrsky has this award. I once had it. Did you lose it? What do you mean you once had it? I think now you're more prominent than back in the past when you were awarded this medal. Secondly, Father Patrick has a medal from Artsakh, and Prime Minister Chernobyrsky, with your humble servant, about 15 years ago, visited not only Artsakh, we visited the trenches on the front line where snipers were shooting. Back then, Mr. Chernobyrsky was the Minister of Justice, and when this minister, an absolutely brave person who knows no sense of fear, he's 80 years old now, but in the last few years he was skydiving with parachute. The entire Slovakia was talking about it. And Mr. Chernobyrsky is very curious, and he wanted to put his head up and look at the sniper in the trench. And the soldier, an Armenian soldier, he feared and he said, "Put your head down, they may shoot you." I wouldn't mind, because in that circumstance, Slovakia would attack Azerbaijan. But this is a joke. We didn't have enough time to give you a medal from Artsakh because we lost Artsakh, but Father Patrick has a medal from Artsakh. So I want to thank you all. This symposium was a success. I'm really happy about the results. I now would like to invite all those who want. Myself and Father Patrick are now going to visit a place 7-8 minutes away from here. It's located in the central part of Bratislava. It's a wonderful church where Father Patrick and I are going to pray. And I will introduce you to a couple of excerpts of Armenian Mass. If you're ready, we're ready to go there. And to conclude, I want to say that I used to work as a simultaneous interpreter in the past, and I want to say thank you to our interpreters who worked with us and translated between Russian and English for us for 2 days. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And let's have a good continuity of our initiatives. And we hope we will have larger event at our second symposium, UK, EU, Russia, and Greater Middle East. Let's take the outcomes of this symposium to the next symposium. Thank you very much. Thank you so much to the interpreters. Thank you very much to Mr. Philip Guzela for his excellent work. Thank you very much, Pan Guzela, and thank you, Lubica, for her amazing work. If you can, I think very few people can be proud of having an assistant like Lubica. I think Lubica is one and the only. Thank you, Lubica. Dominika is sitting here humbly, but she did a lot of work. Dominika speaks several languages. She speaks English, Spanish, and we had to do Spanish. Otherwise, we had Irina speaking Italian, and Dominika could speak Spanish here. We also have Luis Fraga, who doesn't want to admit that his name is Luigi, not Luis. All right, thank you so much indeed. Those who are still with us in Zoom, I want to say that we highly appreciate you, especially Ms. Valentina Omuleva. Please pass our cordial greetings to our good friend, Mr. Gasumyanov, my personal greetings to you and appreciation for staying with us to the end. We appreciate you a lot. Thank you so much. We had to stay with you because we are the co-organizers of this conference and we wanted to listen to these discussions and all presentations. Thank you very much for this open dialogue. And I would like to invite our colleagues who were speaking today to publish their articles in our scientific journal. I listened to really interesting, scientifically grounded opinions today, and we would like to publish them in our journal. In Russian and in English language, we publish our scientific journal called Russia and World Scientific Dialogues. This journal is disseminated not only among academia, but also in the Russian authorities and among decision makers. So I would like to invite you, and I think we can offline discuss the mechanism of submission of articles. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Omuleva. We have almost all presentations in Russian and in English. The recording of the entire symposium has been made. Later, we can choose whatever you want to publish. And I promise to obtain the permissions and consents from the authors and send you the articles. Thank you so much again for our kind cooperation. Thank you very much. And goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.